The law of unintended consequences is a very interesting thing. This was proposed by Robert Merton, an American sociologist. Sometimes, when a government makes a law, or when you make a law, or a company makes a law, or a policy, it may end up giving the exactly opposite result that you had hoped for or had intended. You had certain intentions when you made a particular law. It was supposed to achieve a certain outcome. But actually, when you implement the law, somehow the outcome is quite different from what you had expected. It could even be opposite of what you had expected. This could happen because the world is very complex. You are unable to, maybe the way you form the law is flawed. Maybe people try to, who are going to be affected by it, react to it in different ways than you had hoped or you had expected. They try to subvert it in their own way, and something else happens, and the law doesn't achieve what it was supposed to achieve. It's very interesting. Some of the examples, there are examples, and I will talk of three examples. One was the Four Pests campaign, which was launched by Mao Zedong in China. And the idea was that crops were being eaten by insects and pests, and they wanted to eliminate these insects. Grains and crops were eaten by these pests and insects. So they wanted to reduce this reduction of crops and grains by these insects. They identified four pests: mosquitoes, rats, fleas or flies, and sparrows. And especially they were focused on sparrows. So they decided to kill sparrows. Sparrows were destroying and eating grains and crops, leaving less food for the population, human population. So Mao decided to kill off sparrows or reduce the number of sparrows, and the government launched a program to do this. And they actually did that. They killed off many sparrows, and they hoped that this would protect the grains, and you would have more grains. Actually, the opposite happened. Because when they started killing off sparrows, what happened was, of course, sparrows were dead, so the objective of sparrows not eating grains was achieved. But the other thing was, sparrows also used to eat insects, and those insects used to eat grains also. Sparrows directly ate grains, and sparrows ate other insects, and those other insects ate grains. So when you killed off sparrows, you saved that part, but then you removed the threat from the insects, the grain eating insects, because there were no sparrows to eat those insects, and then those insects started eating much more grains. So in fact, killing sparrows did not save grains, it reduced availability of grains. Completely opposite direction. You wanted to kill sparrows because you wanted to save grains and food and crops. But when you actually killed off sparrows, instead of saving grains, you could not save grains, you lost those grains to other insects who increased because there were no sparrows to eat those insects. So sparrows were eating grains and also eating insects. So when you killed off sparrows, you saved grains directly eaten by sparrows, but you increased insects that were eaten by sparrows, and those insects started eating more grains, and the net result was, instead of saving grains, you lost grains. So it unintended consequences, opposite consequence. Another example is the cobra effect that happened in India during the British rule, colonial rule in Delhi. Said that the governor or somebody in Delhi, the British governor, there was a problem of too many cobras, serpents and snakes, venomous snakes. and that was a problem. So the governor gave people money, said, "Bring me dead cobras, and I'll give you money for that." So people started killing cobras and giving cobras, presenting dead cobras to the government, and government gave them money. So initially it worked, and the menace of cobras went down. But then what happened was people wanted this money, so they started breeding cobras, extra cobras. They would see to it that they produced more cobras by breeding cobras, then they would kill those cobras and then get money from the government. So they started increasing the population of cobras to get more money from the government. Then the government realized that this was happening, so it stopped paying people. Then people released those cobras because they were of no use to them. And then it actually increased the cobra population. Again, unintended consequences. You paid people money to kill cobras, to reduce the population of cobras, and finally ended up having more cobras. You see, this is another example. One more example, I think, was something called Urban Land Ceiling Act, which was implemented years ago in India. The idea was to restrict the land holding by an individual. The idea was that an individual, a private person, shouldn't have too much land, so that they don't hoard this land, and more land is available to the government so that they could make houses for the poor and stuff like that. So they restricted land availability per person. I mean, to a landowner could not hold more than a certain amount of land in an urban area. And that idea was to reduce the prices and free surplus land which was supposed to be for housing for poor and all that. But actually somehow this didn't work. People started the land holding per person decreased, but then people started holding land under names of other people and all that, and somehow land became scarce, availability of land reduced, slums increased, and prices of land went up. The idea was to reduce the prices of land, the land prices in urban areas, and the opposite thing was the outcome. The land price went up, land availability went down, slums went up, and the government had to repeal this act, abolish it, abrogate it. So these are some of the examples of the law of unintended consequences. So you have to think carefully when you make any law about how to frame it. Think through carefully before you actually make any law. First of all, be careful about making laws. Try to have as few laws as possible. And if you make laws, think through very hard, very carefully. Think about how you are going to word it, what kind of consequences would happen, what are the outcomes, what do you want to achieve, what are the possible, you have to anticipate as many scenarios as possible, and maybe tweak it from time to time, and be prepared that people would react in a certain way to this, and people would even try to subvert your efforts, and they would think of their individual interests and immediate interests, self-interests, and not what you have in mind. Your interests and their interests are not aligned, and they are looking at their immediate short-term interests. So you end up making a law with a certain effect that you had in mind, and it backfires and it gets sabotaged. So you need to think through carefully before doing these things, whether a business organization or a government organization. It's a very interesting example. You want to do something, you make a rule or law to achieve something, and the opposite thing happens. It's quite interesting. Thank you.